Charles D. Tarlton is a retired politics professor from California and New York who grew up in the Southwest, enamored of the sights and scents of the desert, and has always been sad that he missed the heyday of the frontier. In recent years, he has focused almost entirely on writing poetry. He lives on the shore now in Connecticut with his wife Anne Knickerbocker, an abstract painter, and Nikki, their black standard poodle. His work is available worldwide at retail stores through iPage Catalog, Amazon, libraries, and Silverbow Store. Candace James from Silverbow has a few words to say.
Yes, I always have a few words to say, and today will be no different. I want to thank everyone that's attending today's launch of Peaches and Roses, and I'll preface the reading with a testimonial on the back cover of the book by Kieran Egan, Professor Emeritus at Simon Fraser University, a member of the Royal Society of Canada and author of Amplified Silence. Egan states, in Peaches and Roses, Charles D. Tarlton has produced a multi-formed and multi-voiced account and commentary on the unbearable injustice wrought upon the Navajo people. This short book is rich in voices, mainly the author's own poetry, which takes many forms, rich and evocative verse, prose, invocation, incantation, and at times likens to the chorus of a Greek tragedy. It includes also quotations from a dozen or more other voices of soldiers, Navajos, government documents, even Nietzsche. All are brilliantly wrought together into a kind of terrible death song. And now, without further ado, I will hand the screen over to Charles.
So, hello, good afternoon, everybody. I'm not exactly certain how to proceed with this. The poems need a little explanation, I think, to start with. I was reading years ago, I think in 2010, I was reading a biography of Kit Carson. I was just curious about him, and it was unnerving when the question came of his role in the Navajo experience. He was cruel and authoritarian and bully, and it was incredible to me. I'd never heard that story. I'd heard all the Custer stories and so on, but never the story of the Navajo. So I got interested and began to do research and so on. In the process, I tried to write an inflamed essay about it, but that got nowhere. So I turned back to verse, and I had this pile of research materials and an attitude. So what this is a series of lengthy poems, each one dealing with a kind of phase or dimension of my perception of the problem of the Navajos, which is sort of, it stands in for the problem of American white treatment of Indians everywhere. So anyway, the first poem, which I'll read, is called Terms for Order, and it's the first one in the book. The first world was an island surrounded by oceans, and there lived the first beings who started out in life. Although these beings are referred to as people, they were not people as we know them, but were insects, and therefore they are called the insect people. This is the beginning of the Navajo story of creation. From the east they came, walking over living things. They dragged behind them a driftwood stick through the sand to make a long line to separate European humans from spiders or caterpillars. From the west, the Diné rescue lost songbirds, beg the dying deer's forgiveness, thankful that the clan can eat. All the gods arise from stories. What have we here? What grows along the line of shadow? Such mountains, surely. Imagine there's nothing, unable to see through red rocks, erased silhouetted pines with a toss of your head. What you can never know, you can imagine. The rain falls that lifted the waters up, trees and children grow. Each season eases into place, its special air and light thrown over us. The blanket grows in the loom. The colored sands poured in tight geometries softly call the gods. Whatever is must have ridden in. The clearing in front of the hogan waits. The first everything, the first one, first dog, first rock, first Astin, first Etzan. All stories rest in equally precarious balance on the pinnacle of what might be. Stories equally insane. How must all this have happened? How could it? The maker and the made thing, what we know, our maker then the creator, Hasealti's wild proliferation. Spontaneous emergence out of nothing is only another possibility. Some great sleeve pulled inside out where vacuums fill in, darkness reveals itself as light, eases into light, is deified by light. I am coyote, raven, eagle, bear, animals in me, live in me. The all-around's a given, such unease as needs account, imagining something given yet unseen, explains something by nothing. My hand some godly plan, the God unknown, mute, heard only in the rattling of some bees. So the second one is a poem called Apache de Navajo, which was what the Spaniards called the Navajo when they first encountered them. It starts with a quotation from the Indian Claims Commission dealing with the Navajos. The Navajos constitute a society in which each individual has a strong sense of belonging with the others who speak the same language and a strong sense of difference and isolation from the rest of humanity. Navajo cohesiveness is due to a common linguistic and cultural heritage, to the occupation of a defined territory, and to a common designation for themselves that is Din, or people, against all others. They are a distinct land-using entity. That's from the 23rd volume of the Indian Claims Commission, page 244. Everything in America, it was like everywhere in America, it was like this. A swell of white European mass rose up, heaved forward, surged against the thin brown line of Indian sand, broke against and scattered it, and like the angry sea, could not be contained. Tumbling backwards, pebbles, mussels, shells, and polished shards made only tinkling noises in the roar of waves crashing on the rocks of necessity, a weight of 40 million whites and their gods against 9,000 Navajos. The far-reaching, the boundless future will be the era of American greatness. Its magnificent domain of space and time, the nation of many nations, is destined to manifest to mankind the excellence of divine principles, to establish on earth the noblest temple ever dedicated to the worship of the Most High, the sacred and the true. Its floor shall be a hemisphere, its roof the firmament of the star-studded heavens. John O. Sullivan. Disturbances all along the line. Two forms of life, presuming each their own predestined role in the rocking of the seasons, in the unfolding of time. Warriors on both sides, responding in their two glad moods of violence, intolerant of challenge, proud, disrespectful of consequences, preferring the short term and its immediate gratifications. Everything thrown into the balance gave in the longest run advantages to power. From the angle of history, both sides rolled the dice into the wind. They became synchronous testaments to our flawed nature. Two long separate stories reached out for each other around the earth. I am trying to intrude right here. The history is all wrapped around me, neither Navajos nor descendant, any soldiers in those hot deserts. I am struggling with some hard symbolic thing. the echo of the world around me, faintly hollow, wondering how we've piled up enough pain and suffering to reach into our own thin air, the lack of substance. Do I long to breathe the smoky Hogan air, sit in the desert sunset, smell the corn cakes, the wind off the red rocks? From the East, Europe's struggles, church and empire, popes and kings and parliaments had taken hold of the new world from the one side, and from the West, across the frozen land bridge at Berezina in an earlier millennium, outliers from Siberia had descended out of the northern ice into western deserts and carved yellow cities in the stone. They meet in violent contests up and down the north-south sliding scrimmage line, establishing irresistibly the European history of America. And the people's blood flowed. Creeks and Seminoles, the Kiowa, Comanche, South Sioux, Cheyenne, Arapaho, Apache, and Navajo herded onto dusty reservations, and their narratives abruptly terminated. The next poem is called Westward Ho, the Navajo, which was a newspaper headline when they were moving the Navajo out. The policy pursued, this is U.S. Grant, President of the United States. The policy pursued toward the Indians has resulted favorably. Many tribes of Indians have been induced to settle upon reservations, to cultivate the soil, to perform productive labor of various kinds, and to partially accept them to avoid extermination. And monstrous murder eludes the otherwise blind push into these few islands of submission, where the defeated whimper in their change. That unsaid. Well, of course, dreams of gold and silver under hunting grounds, best grazing for cattle. It turns out exactly to be where the Hardine herded horses and sheep. We Americans pretending we'd found forgotten money in the street, or were only entering abandoned houses, taking it for granted we could steal whatever we found. Already encamped Indians were only in the way. Brute force is all and nothing else. But imagine instead of Navajo, they'd found Frederick's Prussians or armed samurai clans, preeminent in the arts, both sword and poetry, settled there before we came. We would have had to restrain our famous destiny, where it would now be far less manifest, somewhere near Newton, Mass, or Ramapo, New Jersey. We are the new Ulysses, modern Visigoths, the Huns. Turnabout. Like Cyclops, we ingested them, the national peristalsis defecating the result in our own image out the back of our machine for devouring the continent. Those we didn't kill, we lost sight of. They had learned to dress up in wool, talk like Hoosiers or Virginians. Many went to school in Pennsylvania learning to be white. You find their sad burlesques in photo albums now, lost young Navajo men in trousers and boots, staring into the camera, their soft wild eyes like a trapped animal's. Parenthesis, Manuelito, own two sons were sent to Carlisle Indian School, but died of sicknesses contracted there. Exterminate, exact. The term was used to threaten just what consequences native armed resistance would incite. The other cold, ironic word that burns so fiery now up from the pages of the Army's correspondence is, oh no, 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 concentration. In referring to the planned involuntary reservations, especially the Bosque Redondo, where the Navajos were herded up and made to go, why they might as well have been an infestation. Rats and fleas carrying the plague, or mosquitoes vectoring malaria or ticks. Number 7 is called Good to Go. It starts with a quotation from General James Carleton, who was the Army officer of ambiguous career successes, who was in charge of most of the military dealings with the Navajos. For a long time past, the Navajo Indians have murdered and robbed the people of New Mexico. Last winter, when 18 of their chiefs came to Santa Fe to have a talk, they were warned and were told to inform their people that for these murders and robberies, the tribe must be punished, unless some binding guarantees should be given that in future these outrages should cease. Another Army officer, John C. Walker, captain, said, "I would remark that the Navajos everywhere evince the most earnest desire for peace. I am prepared to say what would be the better line of policy towards them, but there is no doubt that a war made upon them now by us would fall the heaviest upon the least guilty, would transform a nation which has already made considerable progress in civilized arts into a race of beggars, vagabonds, and robbers. The long ancestral legacy from you and me back along our fathers and their fathers' fathers, lost and unremembered, stood poised to strike them. The Indians, in this case, Navajos, an irritant, and us impatient for the striking, lightning and the darting jab of rattlesnake. Quickly now, history is waiting. When you step into the yaw of time, step in there gingerly, or it might swallow us alive. Lay up a curse. A curse might not be worked to full horror for a century or more. We ought to have learned from our cold tormenting of the Navajos, you never cut down a man's olive trees, the gods become furious. And we ignore the devil's wood sprites, calling birds, chattering in the last seconds of the dark, a deliberate deformity in the evolution of the world, and at some peril, broken savages. They are patient when we are not, methodical when we rush blindly forth, call back along the line of history, go more slowly. We've never known the fullest consequences of such wildness. Eager, greeting, festering actions in a fit, tormenting, starving out, belittling, torturing some, and then, oh, the evil gets so easy, rolls more comfortable. Whoever is an obstacle, the slight annoyance, a man of peace, a man of war, wrestling on the desert floor. In morality as well as other ways, it will be costly, this exterminating. But when the time came and they had scoured down the Navajo in a savage war, they said attrition as if it were a euphemism. They cleaned out the nest and rolled the eggs along in the sand, kicking them, as we shall find, in shooting stragglers. Guilt in war? We hesitate 160 years ago. So many books and films have numbed our sensitivity to murder and revenge. The only good Indian. Then there were no more. There were no more. Diné, Peaches, Hogans, Roses, Navajos in the Canyon de Chelly. The next one is number 9. It's called Dance Around the Fires. And it again starts with a quotation from a lieutenant colonel in the Army and from the Santa Fe Gazette from 1863. The first quote is, "Aside from all considerations of humanity, the extermination of such a people will be the work of the greatest difficulty." And then from the paper, "We'll first chastise, then civilize bold Johnny Navajo." Hot winds stirred up by 1,000 horses blow leaves brightly dead yellow and red under the desert's hard sky dome, blown up in close clouds, billowed in front of distant mountains, some stick against a stone, some collecting in the damp pools of a creek bed, dead leaves. It is a cold wind can play a killing song so sweetly, without rancor. It is some war, or the wind itself blows on the leaves, the dead red leaves, and flutters, jiggles the sweet yellow peaches swinging on leafy stems. And the leaves sing a leaf song, call the wind master or slave. In the canyon of harnessed winds and leaves, in one hollow of red stones in the river, time rubs and opens its eyes. In the first contacts, an intrusion added, aggravations, hunger, a tightening of distances, how to get beneath the skin to listen to blood and read the soft drum tapping, to scatter barriers where barriers are being built eye view, confident in the whip, the size and snaky heft of it in the longest run, besides bravado, a continent, and endless men, wagons, guns, flour, beer, a bravery seldom tested either way, but face to face. On his knees in a New Hampshire furrow, weeding around the precious corn shoots, a boy dreamed of a wild ride on an Indian pony across the sparse grass of the prairies somewhere, he guessed, in Nebraska or Wyoming. The Arapaho, Sioux, Cheyenne yelping behind him. He turns to get off a shout of his own and feels his heart pound. Aye, aye! Strangers, they have come to the edge of their own world, to the beginning of unexpected creatures, unheard of geography. On the horizon, a low-lying line of mountains, soldiers fresh from fratricide, posted to the moon. Interlude, a little play here. Manuelito speaks, the movie. And the rest of this script is partially a imitation film script. Fade in. Interior, a Navajo Hogan, a gathering of warriors, night. Manuelito. They come here speaking of oceans, of water walking for days, floating on the water in human waves, piling up, pushing in here from a world of machines. They're big guns, they live where the big guns grow. They make the sky burn, they eat one another, they sleep in the ground. They have come to master the dine. Coyote speaks. An urge to dance comes over you, the dust on your moccasins, your boots, with the sun slipping behind the red-tipped hills, the fire of the dance, the lifting, the falling, the rolling over and around, and then the voice of the choreographer. What do we realize in their dancing? What do we learn of men suddenly freed in the wildness, cut loose? Who exactly are these savages? Peaches and Roses, the New Mexico Territory, 1863. On the 3rd, moved camp about 3 miles north to another orchard. There I cut down 300 of the best peach trees I have ever seen in the country, every one of them bearing fruit. That's from Captain John Thompson. He was one of the marauding officers under the command of Kit Carson, who, when he went into the Canyon de Chelly, where the Navajos had this elaborate and wonderful agriculture, where they grew peach trees. They went in and tore all the peach trees down, pulled them out of the ground, made big piles out of them and burned them. And then this next quote is from Captain Eben Everett. Found in our camp a rather rare thing in this country, abundance of wild rose bushes, gathered and prepared some sprigs for home on the Hudson. And then from a contemporary writer, Henri Coulette, an American poet actually, it was the thorn that plotted to outsmart the cunning of the rose. Shaken to the ground, rare sweet desert peaches, each time the black axes cut through the smooth, hard skin to soft heartwood underneath, the trees would shudder and sigh as they rolled over on their green crowns and thrust branches out in front to break an awkward fall. Lowing cattle reluctant in the chute wake to be stunned. You can hear the captive volt, but they all bleed to death. The real horror lies in the magnitude of our misdeeds, the difference between murder and massacre. All day into the night, they hauled the ragged down trees. You could hear the ring and rattle of the horses' collars, a slap of their traces, The horses snort as they come out of the dark into the fire's circle. The soldiers stacked up peach tree mountains and set them alight. In the hot smoke, the smell of fruit roughly cooking, sweet and bitter, a harsh syrup in the air. A job of work they might have had hauling oak beer bales in a bustling city. Step up into the pub. All the orange trees in Southern California were bulldozed out, stacked in massive jumbles, and burned all through the night. When I was a kid growing up in Southern California, we moved into a house in the middle of, near San Bernardino, in the middle of orange groves for miles and miles and miles in all directions. And when they started the big housing boom in California, they came to the orange grove behind our place, a massive place where my brother and I used to hunt jackrabbits and find the biggest navel orange in the grove. They came and put up sticks, laths with little ribbons on top of them. And we knew it was some kind of thing they were going to do. So my brother and I went around and tore up all the sticks, but they just put them back again. And then they came in with bulldozers and they bulldozed up a whole grove of orange trees, stacked them up in the middle and burned them. It was the most horrifying thing. The burning Navajo peach trees threw shadows against the canyon's red rock walls, making silhouettes of the laboring soldiers dance. In twos and threes, they stooped and hauled, turned and pulled, a slow, gigantic ballet in the twisting light. The symbolism of bonfires is not lost around the world. They burn in hot vengeance or wild celebration. Wayang shadow dancers tell the story of the bloody battle of Kurukshetra mythology for war. A military operation, the hunting down and destruction of peaches, were executed without sentiment. Mounted soldiers searched the length of the Canyon de Chelly. On the way, they tore up melons and squash, ripped out the beans, and stole the corn for their horses. It is prohibited to attack. This is from the Geneva Conventions. It is prohibited to attack, destroy, remove, or render useless objects indispensable to the survival of the civilian population, such as foodstuffs, agricultural areas for the production of foodstuffs, crops, livestock, drinking water installations and supplies, and irrigation works for the specific purpose of denying them for their sustenance value to the civilian population or to the adverse party, whatever their motive, whether in order to starve out civilians, cause them to move away, or for any other motive. Vietnamese war veterans came home having destroyed whole towns and villages, remembering dead friends. My uncle, George Malstead, recalled on bombing raids how on the way back from Germany, all the guns on the B-17 strafed every living thing. Searching later for ripe peaches they might have missed the first time, another captain of horse from New York came upon thorny wild roses cast among the stones. Back in the church where 30 years before I had served Mass, the same long, late shadows, the same redolence of flowers. A rainy spell and purple wildflowers around grapevine rise from the desert flow. Oh, you had to be there. In 1898, Professor E.O. Wooten described a remarkable new rose from southern New Mexico, giving it the name Rosa stellata on account of the stellate trichomes. The peculiar, mostly trifoliate, leaves the leaflets with cuneiform bases and more or less truncate, sharply toothed apices, gave the plant an unusual appearance, while even the flowers, described as large and showy, deep rose purple, were not at all like those of ordinary wild roses of the Rocky Mountains. That's by T.D.A. Cockerell in 1913. How much do the prickly desert rose springs weigh when we carry them home to grow on a fence in Coxsackie, New York, or Schodack Landing, where a wife might wait and watch every day for the Mary Powell steaming up against the current and the tide from Beacon or Catskill on her way to Albany? on the tarmac at Auckland Airport, 1972. They sprayed the plane with insecticide up and down the aisle. Blow prairie winds, blow the transgenic corn to organic fields, forget dwarf thoroughbreds, maximizing the yield. The fires burned out and settled down to peach coals. The captain's roses, wrapped in coarse, dampened cloth, rested in a roll's slicker. The peaches, small, hard, red-yellow clingstones, used mostly dried. They had come from China, brought by conquistadores. Okay, this is number 12. It's called At Fated Darkened Intersections. And it has a couple of quotes. The first is from someone named Hampton Sides. And so, with no one to fight, Carson's campaign became of necessity a war of grinding attrition. He threw himself into this dark work. And then from Manuelito, the leader of the Navajos. When the Americans first came, we had a big dance, and they danced with our women. We also traded. Answer the most pressing question, represent his deepest fears, the most recurrent ones, recurrent from the Latin run or hasten back, return, and again, stand forth, pause, draw fear unblinking from antelope's eyes into the stone, high on unlit cavern ceilings, carve, as Carson's soldiers did, their Kilroys on the pink and orange cathedral walls of Canyon de Chelly, your own and everyone's truths. In my head, between long dead Indians and soldiers, there's a world of difference. The ways they live, costumes and food, how they would answer why. Given white flour and whole raw coffee beans to tide them over, the Navajos in Bosque Redondo mixed them simply up with water boiled to make a stew and got deathly sick. They also fell behind on the long walk in the desert. The columns stretched for miles. Some fell behind, and the soldiers dropped back to shoot them. They fell behind like crippled horses, the figuration of our progress. Sing out, you pious choirs in Springfield and Pittsburgh. Worn down from wrestling at the confluence of races, red and white traffic slows. The blows come more heavily, slower, but do more damage. How can we even talk this way? A literacy of violence, sharpened up, cuts through the perfect tense in an arc of the passive voice, uttered in breathless subjunctives. It all might have been done so differently. The colonel's heart of murderers at heart, his order bleak, stark and bloody, brooking no reluctance, sent trembling through the ranks. This one is called Manuelito and Kit Carson Argue in the Dawn. And it starts with a quote from each one of them. First, Manuelito. The whites were always trying to make the Indians give up their life and live like white men, go to farming, work hard, and do as they did. And the Indians did not know how to do that and did not want to anyway. If the Indians had tried to make the whites live like them, the whites would have resisted, and it was the same way with many Indians. And then Kit Carson said, they'll all soon be gone anyhow. Soon be gone anyhow. You were always meant to carry something back with you, something you'd picked up on your vision quest. You looked so hard how water twisted around rocks in the stream, that rocks dissolved in tactile evidence, that water danced its mirrored reflections, how it gathered everything, bent it in quicksilver, made it dance, that one might talk, one's will the only obstacle, with the stones, overhear the deepest truths the water tells the sky's reflections, once it had captured them in its twisting, cooling movements. A long, poor life, a short one, the prisoner learned the meanings and the walls by heart, learn to love the close fit, the dust, the peeling paint. Here's an Indian, an idea in itself. Here's a white, self, paper-thin cellophane you see right through. Stretching out a long, thin road in the desert, you can see bent sheets of corrugated steel where once a race of warriors rode on fearsome ponies and wiled their ideas into the hearts of enemies. There was a philosopher I once read who said, the way you judge civilization is by maintenance. I really can't remember this guy's name, but anyway, maintenance. And what you notice on the reservation is the same as you notice in poor slum areas of cities and so on, is no maintenance. And on the reservation, it's so painful to look on that in lots of different ways. I've seen it on several different Indian reservations. They came in droves, smacking their lips. I want entirely to listen. Scattering the sand in the wind, pelting in rat-a-tat the roof of a gas station, though only one pump is working. And a beer can rolls along also in the wind, and the sun reluctantly goes slowly down, erasing ugliness. Distantly, red rocks glow, needles, towers, and elephants of rocks kick the last orange bits of the day into the air one last time over the shacks. More abstractly than imagined, the deal was struck. An exchange of circumstance switched cultures. Here we cut off the flow of artifacts, sustain the one, trade in my wandering across the land, swaps game for packaged foods, gives up mesquite fires at night, tending corn and peaches, the herds of sheep, the occasional raid, and now in exchange, an old pickup, wasting diseases, loan sharks, teenage suicide, diabetes, cervical cancer, tuberculosis, black mold, but still dirt floors. A pride all silhouetted, thin, a ricochet. The roar of the semi blows through the settlement, the smell of diesel, burned rubber, the red taillights shrink in the distance, the whole filled in with quiet. The last restless soul turns in bed the one last time and falls asleep. The darkness waits now by itself for the dawn, for the sun to illuminate in one blinding, unseen second the red rocks of Denita. Each morning before anything stirs, the world is red in the sun's first light. The world is, for this second, old and pure. The ghosts of Manuelito and Kit Carson are heard arguing in the red canyons, in the borrowed voices of hurrying coyotes. In the bright light of the hunt, and again, the first quote is from Major General James Henry Carleton, in a sense, along with Kit Carson, the villain of the piece. An Indian is more watchful and a more wary animal than a deer. He must be hunted with skill. He cannot be blundered upon, nor will he allow his pursuers to come upon him when he knows it, unless he's the stronger. And then Kit Carson says, we have shown the Indians that in no place, however formidable or inaccessible in their opinion, are they safe from the pursuit of the troops of this command, and have convinced a large portion of them that the struggle on their part is a hopeless one. Out here, from any escarpment, you can see rainstorms from 50 miles away, moving slowly, lightning dropping underneath them, lending a better sense of scale. The plan to drive the Navajo ahead of us, the army to push them off their rancherias. While they hide in the mesquite and scrub pine, will trample the corn, burn the houses, pollute the water, break up the pottery, and empty stores on the hungry ground. Cornered in the Canyon de Chelly. My brothers, high in the shadows, a wild shaman withers the alien soldiers with a painted look. Sing of the rocks. No one might come upon you and ignore your raw nobility, lords of the earth demanding to be heard, to be listened to. Snakes, tumbleweed, and the bark scorpion, its stinger hanging over us like the shadow of a monstrance. Sing race in the wind, sing in the hypnotic chanting warnings of fierce gods from underworlds unknown. North wind rises on the stone face, blows through cracks like reeds, a music twirling in the dusty cathedral of red rock, rises to heaven and looks coolly down. From a childhood of reading Indian adventures, this: the wolf moves silently, without effort, but with purpose. Careful as thread and wisp sculpting of the slightest turning of a twig, a leaf, a stone, on the hunt they moved in quiet, seeing, hearing, and smelling everything. Their eyes fastened on the prey, ears throw out the widest loops, their noses twist and twitch in a bath of wild scents, in an art of rare communing. Dissolve the crystals of yourself in the heat and the cool moonlight, under the eyes of your pursuer, in the path of the bullet, fastened to fate. I wonder then if what ran in me in the rivers of my reveries could reach into the desert, could find the crystal nucleus and make it grow into black, blue, yellow, and white glass palaces, unreachable, invulnerable, and safe.